A few months ago, I decided to start a list that recorded what I believed were little problems with Warzone. If I died to something really silly, like not being allowed to cut my parachute, I'd note it down. If I noticed something strange, like the cases where you can't place pings accurately, I'd note them down. A couple of weeks later, and the list was far longer than expected. My first video, which was quite long, only covered about half the things I wanted to talk about. This video is for the remaining half. Many of the things discussed in my first video were pretty surface level. It wasn't hard to convince people that ziplines suck. Everyone already knew that. This time, we're going a little deeper. There will be some very obvious problems that most will agree with, but there will be many more smaller things that fewer players talk about. So if you watched my previous video and thought I was too nitpicky, this one isn't for you. But if you're interested, here's part 2 of the little things about Call of Duty Warzone. Okay, let's get it out of the way early. It makes sense to have an animation to put on your gas mask, and it also makes sense to make it automated for players that are brand new to the game. But to not give an option to turn off this automation, especially when the animation frequently gets you killed at the end of games, is inexplicable. Just look at this timing. I come out of the gas and start shooting, and my character decides to take her gas mask off mid-fight. This couldn't have waited. Because I can no longer ADS, I go back to cover and then re-challenge. And although I'm already out of the gas, the game still feels the need to force my gas mask back on. I guess none of this is surprising when you realize the game prioritizes taking your gas mask off instead of opening your parachute when you're plunging to your death. Here's an idea. There's an incredibly useless button right here. Let's make it the gas mask toggle. And speaking of the gas, why is there such a difference in vision clarity between those in the gas and those in the safe zone? When you're in the gas, you're essentially blind, but if you're in the safe zone, you can perfectly see through the gas. You're already at such a disadvantage while getting zone trapped. There's no reason the person holding you should also have the benefit of perfect vision. This next one is something everyone's familiar with. Why are fractional armor plates still a thing? If you have a damaged plate that was still providing protection, why would you remove it to put on a fresh plate, as opposed to just using the free slot to add extra armor? This was more relevant when the game first released, since there were far fewer armor plates around. But I think it's worth mentioning with the new tempered perk, which makes every plate more valuable, and therefore every fractional plate more stupid. Here's some minor points on field upgrades. Trophies are far too bouncy. Nobody is out here doing trophy trick shots, so there's no reason placing one should be this difficult. It's a somewhat similar story with sentry guns and deployable cover, except you will have trouble placing those at all. And what's the go with field upgrades despawning when placing 2 at the same time? I can see why it happens with 2 ammo boxes. There would definitely be some gas tanking possibilities otherwise. But how would you exploit placing, for instance, an ammo box in an armor box? And if there's no unfair advantage to be gained, why do they despawn? The point here is that it's annoying to lose access to your teammate's armor box because he placed a trophy on a heli, and it's especially annoying when something like this happens.
I'll take the wheel.
Let's start with the cases where vehicles are overpowered. The third-person view has been a problem since day 1 and needs a nerf. Based on the passenger view, I'm not sure that a first-person driving experience is the answer, so a third-person view may be necessary. But to give a bird's-eye view to this extent, where you can perfectly track your enemy's movements over walls, or hills, or inside buildings, is way too much. Next, trucks remain a problem in all game modes. Some custom tournaments have started banning their use altogether because every endgame just became several trucks driving around the last few zones. Not only is their health too high, it's around 3600 HP, or the equivalent of 142 bullets with the current day EM2, but the hitboxes are incredibly inconsistent. So much so that they're one of the best countermeasures against cheaters, because even aimbots struggle with these hitboxes, and if this guy was struggling, you can imagine how difficult it is for reasonable human beings. Trucks became so bad in solos that Raven were forced to reduce their spawn rate, and this certainly improved the experience. But the issue with vehicles in solos goes a little deeper, and I think rovers and SUVs can be just as bad. Here's some of the things you can do. You can, of course, run over your enemy. You can hop out at full speed and instantly start shooting. You can park sideways to use Warzone's built-in laser beam mechanic. You can switch to the passenger seat and do this. Try this next one out. Drive at an enemy, hop out close to them, slide cancel, and then shoot. Unless your opponent is really, really good, you are not going to lose the battle. Some players won't even shoot back, and you'll probably win even if you're using the starter pistol. In solos, the vehicle exit animation, or the complete lack thereof, is, and always has been, insanely overpowered. Reddit user Order Abbey made a cool post where he reversed the entry animation to show what an exit animation might look like, and I think something like this should definitely exist in solos, but I'm not convinced it would be good for duos, trios, or quads. In these modes, the exit animation is naturally less powerful. You know, hopping out on a squad doesn't really give the same results. But more importantly, as it stands, it's not hard for a team to shoot people out of SUVs or rovers, and adding a prolonged exit animation would make it a borderline free kill every time someone drives past your squad. I don't think we would want to add features that discourage people from driving vehicles altogether, at least in every game mode that's not solos. Let's briefly touch on the maneuverability of vehicles, which isn't always the best. They get stuck too easily, with part of this being map design. Why do trucks get stuck everywhere? Why is this rock blocking this exit? And part of this being non-destructible terrain. Why can't big trucks run over small trees? Or wooden chairs? Or, shovels in the ground? These two fences are identical. Why can I only drive through one of them? The vehicle flipping is more annoying, because it seems to always happen at the worst times. Strangely, I recall that in the first few months following Warzone's release, they never used to flip. You could drive off pretty much anything and your vehicle would stay upright. And correct me if I'm wrong, but assuming my recollection is correct, the devs at some point updated the game's physics, making it much easier for vehicles to flip. Oh, and they also added a bomb that automatically detonates when this happens. And if all that's true, I think it was a bad update. Maybe it's more realistic for a vehicle to flip when driving off a cliff, but now there's so many cases where they flip when they definitely shouldn't. I think the physics were way better before. Lastly, I want to touch on a specific problem I've always had with vehicles that I've never heard anyone mention, and when I searched it up, I only found a single Reddit thread with a single like discussing the issue. Whenever I exit a vehicle, there's a good chance that my character will automatically throw a tactical grenade. I'm not pressing the button in these clips. Since Warzone's release, I've always run a heartbeat. Not because I'm paying tribute to my 12-year-old self, but because no matter what throwing tactical I put in my class, I just automatically lose it when I exit a vehicle. If anyone knows anything about this, please let me know. If there's one thing every Warzone player has in common, it's that we absolutely love our loadouts. So much so that pretty much every player, in pretty much every game they've ever played, has spent the first few minutes looting just to get their hands on one. They're one of the best parts about Warzone. Unfortunately, there's a few cases where you're unnecessarily prevented from getting your loadout. Let's go through them. First, this game's spawning preferences aren't great. Sometimes you spawn directly over your loadout, and sometimes you spawn 1700 meters away. The game should be smart enough to realize I don't want to spawn here. I want to spawn here. And if it's not that smart, why doesn't it just let us choose whether we want to spawn over our loadout, or over our previous loot, or over our teammates? Next, for at least a year or so following Warzone's release, the free loadouts would land in inaccessible areas. I can't remember the last time this happened to me, so I think it's been fixed. But with the new map, I'm hoping it doesn't take nearly as long for loadouts to stop dropping in spots like this, or off the map. Every now and then, you inevitably pick up the wrong loadout. This is the worst. You expect to pick up your fully decked out Farah, and you somehow end up with a 25-round C58. How this weapon was even in one of your loadouts, we'll never know. But you should be able to go back and get the correct class. As long as you don't try to cheese a snipe cross-map with a HDR, would it be so bad if we had a 10-second grace period to go back and change our loadout? What I find most annoying about this one is that, if you play on controller, picking up the wrong loadout kind of isn't your fault. Do you remember when they brought in the RCXD killstreak? They placed it at the bottom of the buy station, below the loadout, meaning that the typical actions to buy a loadout on controller, up XX, no longer worked. Everyone was accidentally buying the RCXD car. It changed a year's worth of muscle memory, and it was so universally hated that Raven had to change it back. It's kind of the same thing when picking up your loadout. For some reason, the game remembers what class you previously grabbed. If you pick up your second class, the next time you open a loadout drop, your marker will start on your second class. Pick up your fifth, it'll start on your fifth next time. This doesn't make any sense. Depending on when you grab it, the same actions don't always give you the same class, and so when you need to grab your loadout really quickly, it's very easy to make a mistake. I don't think anyone likes dying when they're not given the chance to fight back. From time to time, this also happens at buy stations. Let's say you want to buy a precision. I've played this game a lot, so I know I have to press up 6 times and X twice. It still takes me more than a second and a half. The problem is, this game's time to kill is really fast. And this was an optimal scenario. For most players, it'll take far longer. Put differently, if you get caught using a buy station, you're pretty much dead. And with some of the places they're located, it happens more than you'd think. With that said, I think everyone would appreciate more efficient buy station navigation. In solos, armor plates are the fastest item you can buy. Open the buy station, press X twice, and you're done. It takes less than a third of a second. If we had hotkeys, you could buy every item as quickly. You want that precision? Press L2 twice. You want to buy all your teammates back without sacrificing your life? Press square twice to use the buy all function. Of course, they would be fully customizable. I would probably use something like this, but players could use as many as they'd like, or they could avoid using them altogether. What about the items themselves? We've already covered plates, gas masks, field upgrades, and loadouts. What about self-revives? I've never liked the fact that they're infinitely reusable, but I wouldn't change them because they're far too important for maintaining one's sanity when playing against these quick-scoping, no flinch, sometimes no glint snipers. To further aid efficiency, advanced UAVs should have their own slot, and they should also show what level an enemy's fighting on. If you're in a building with multiple levels, it's generally preferable to have a UAV instead of an advanced, because the UAV will indicate whether your enemy is above or below. Advanced UAVs cost 3 times as much. There shouldn't be a disadvantage in comparison to the regular UAV. The ability to buy your teammates back might be the single best feature in Warzone. It only has one problem. After your second death, the game starts loading your teammates' POV so you can start spectating. And while it's loading, even though you're already full dead, your teammates cannot buy you back. They have to wait 10 to 15 seconds for you to fully load into their POV. I don't think anyone would expect the game to have instant loading times, but if it's going to be 15 seconds before I'll be able to load back in and respawn, okay, but don't make my teammate wait 15 seconds to buy me. Let them buy me in advance and move away from the buy station. Also, what's with the ridiculous loading viewpoint? While loading your teammate's POV, you get a bird's eye view of the spot you died, and you're able to tell your teammate exactly where their enemy is located. This should be removed altogether. And finally, airspace too crowded. Look, if it didn't exist, our recon friends would just be spamming even more airstrikes in the final zone. Endgames would start to resemble the ones with those infinite cluster strike cheaters. So it's a necessary feature, but I would change one thing. Take this example. I self-revive behind this rock and get precisioned. I'm one shot, so if I move from this rock, I'm dead. My only way out of this is using my own airstrike to make the other squad move. But since this guy precisioned me, I'm not allowed to use my own. The airspace too crowded feature should exist within teams, as it does now, but it shouldn't exist between teams. A 30-minute game shouldn't be decided by whoever uses their airstrike first. Does anyone else get the phantom red dots? You know, the bug that happens so frequently that you're repeatedly going to the map only to see people fighting 2,000 meters away? The fact that players are fighting on the opposite side of Verdansk isn't useful information. I'd prefer not to see it. Also, how haven't glitched vehicles been fixed yet? When you see a red SUV, someone should be driving it, but when you go to check it out, no one's there. It's just another bug that I'm surprised hasn't been patched by now. What about using the map and driving simultaneously? I remember when I first drove a vehicle in this game. I was annoyed that I couldn't accelerate without the map fully zooming in. On a PlayStation controller, if you use L2 and R2 to aim and shoot, this isn't a problem, since the zoom in and out controls for the map are L1 and R1. However, if you prefer to aim and shoot with L1 and R1, the map controls remain the same. The buttons are independent of however you choose to remap your controller. So if you prefer to shoot with R1, you cannot accelerate without the map fully zooming in, and if you prefer to aim with L1, you cannot zoom out without your car slowing down. It's another one of those really obvious day one problems that never got fixed. Let's talk about Warzone's marking system. Sometimes the marks you place get in the way, meaning you need to remove them to see better while fighting. And the same is true for your teammates' marks. But one obvious feature the game is missing is the ability to remove them yourself. If my teammates' mark's in the way while I'm fighting, I have to ask them to stop what they're doing and remove it manually. I can't remove it myself. Why not? Also, marking isn't precise enough. If you want to mark the direction of an enemy but there's a bit of loot below you, it will almost always mark the loot. It's also very difficult and sometimes impossible to mark things through doors. If marking was just that bit more precise as to where your crosshair's pointing, it would make communicating with your teammates that little bit easier. A related point is about precisions and clusters. I don't know what this precision targeting system is all about, and I certainly don't know what's going on with this green laser, but it's way too easy to place your airstrikes in the wrong spot. It should be a regular crosshair, and since we're all capable of aiming anywhere on the screen, there'd be fewer mistakes. The solution wouldn't be perfect. You would still, for instance, place them on tree branches, but it would have to be better than what we have now. Since we're far removed from the times where it took 3 minutes to pick up an armor satchel, I'd say Warzone's looting is quite good. In fact, aside from still showing the wrong guns, which is really a non-issue, and the cases where loot gets stacked directly on top of each other, which is more common, there's not much to complain about, but I still think there's some room for improvement. There are some minor points, like why am I still looting pistols off the floor? What's the point of having ground loot pistols which are so much worse than the one you spawn with? If it's so important to have players using a variety of pistols, they should have just changed the starter pistol more than once since Warzone's release. Also, if you get full plates from looting a satchel when you don't already have one, you should also get full plates when you do. You should be encouraged to, and not punished for, playing aggressively and using up a lot of your plates. I can see why they did this. You wouldn't want players with 6 plates taking all the satchels, but I think there's a better solution. If you have any spare plates when looting a satchel, you should automatically drop those plates. Same thing with armor boxes. There would be fewer satchels lying around, but there would be far more plates. I think that's a decent trade-off to allow players with empty satchels to get some more plates. Automatic looting is really cool. The fact that you don't have to loot plates or pieces of ammo manually is incredibly convenient, but I've never understood why this convenience isn't utilized more frequently. For instance, why aren't gas masks auto-loot? Unless you can see the future and know for certain that you'll die to the gas mask animation, everyone would always prefer to have one. And so, like plates, they should be auto-looted when you run over them. And for added convenience, when you already have one, you should automatically loot ones that are more durable than your own. The gold gas mask lasts around 24 seconds, and the regular one around half that long. So the preference relationship looks something like this. You could make a similar argument for auto-looting satchels, kill streaks, and even field upgrades. I'd also like to see some form of auto-looting after you respawn. When you re-land on your body, it takes forever to loot both your weapons, your armor satchel, your gas mask. You get the point. It would be really cool if the game remembered your items after respawning, meaning you could just auto-loot everything by running over your body. This means you would never have to spend 40 seconds scouring through piles of loot just to find your MP5. And finally, these respawning crates from Rebirth would be a great addition. As the Verdansk map has gotten older and older, it's become increasingly difficult to find any loot mid to late game. You want to land on this building on the outside of Lumber? It's probably looted. This building on the outskirts of Military? Probably looted. Now this won't matter as much with the new map, but a few months later, the same thing will happen. Players will become so familiar with where everything is, and they'll be so good at looting, that it'll be so difficult to find anything after respawning. Let me start this section with what is, I believe, an unpopular opinion. I don't think Warzone's footstep audio is that bad. It used to be a big problem. I remember watching a Jack Frags video a while back that proved this. But a few updates later, and I'm pretty confident that even with my $100 headset, I hear almost all of the footsteps. An unfortunately relatable example of good footstep audio is with our old friend. Whenever I get killed by dead silence, I can pretty much call it out every time before I see my kill cam. I know it's dead silence instantly because I was expecting to hear the footsteps, because I almost always hear the footsteps. Now, if so many people have such trouble with Warzone's audio, why does everyone complain about dead silence? If you can't hear footsteps to begin with, dead silence isn't a problem, right? Competitive Warzone players are an even better example. If you're firmly in the camp of thinking there's a big problem with the footstep audio, I'd strongly recommend you go and watch some of these plays for a few hours. If you haven't ever watched any of them, you'll literally be blown away with how well they're able to use the audio to know exactly where everyone is. With all that said, I'm not saying it's perfect. There are occasions where you just don't hear enemy footsteps. And the vertical audio. Plain and simple. Warzone's vertical audio sucks. There can be an enemy sprinting on a floor just a few meters above you, and you'll be unable to distinguish whether those footsteps are above or below. It makes fighting in buildings with multiple floors a complete nightmare. I also think there's a few questions to be asked about Warzone's general audio design. Do we need airstrikes to be so loud? Do we need so much ambient noise? You know, the creaks in the houses. The wind noises on these tarps that sound exactly like footsteps. Do we need breathing to sound like this? And most importantly, do we need dead silence? It's been such a problem for such a long time that I'm beginning to think people attribute it to the general notion that the footstep audio is horrible. And I think if it was removed, as it should be, you'd see far fewer complaints. This section is a small collection of things that didn't fit into other categories. Things like, I would like the ability to actually see when I'm playing. You shouldn't get rewarded for ADSing a door 3 meters away with an RPG. When someone leaves the game when they're about to die, the person shooting at them should get the kill. And when I die, I would like to see my kill cam. Not once every 3 or 4 deaths, every single time. In the Gulag, it would be nice if the fights were fair 1v1s, not 1v1s plus callouts. It would also be nice if so many Gulags weren't decided by whoever hits their stun. Another game I sometimes play is NBA 2K. And if you think Warzone's got problems, this game's in another realm entirely. One problem is its servers. It's not uncommon to have sessions where you lag out once every few games. And because your internet wasn't at fault, you can immediately rejoin the same server you were just playing in, head to the same court you were just playing on, and watch your own character, now being controlled by an AI, play out the rest of the game. You cannot join back in and start playing, even though you're right there. Now this is NBA 2K. I wouldn't expect them to think of adding a reconnect feature, and even if they did, I certainly wouldn't expect them to be capable of implementing it. But surely we can hold Call of Duty to a higher standard. With all the problems players have had disconnecting from games, how do we not have the ability to reconnect? How amazing would it be if after losing connection, you didn't have to wait 15 minutes for your teammates to finish the game before you can play again? You could reconnect to the servers, be prompted to rejoin your game, load back in, and then get brought back by your teammates. A reconnect feature would be so incredibly well received. So there it is. 2 videos, Over 50 minutes. Many little things. But let's briefly touch on the things I didn't cover. The most notable omission was Rebirth Island, and this was simply because I haven't played it enough. I like this mode, and once I play it more, I'm sure I'll have enough ideas for it to warrant its own shorter video. Custom games were also omitted. I haven't played any of these, but I've watched a lot of custom tournaments, and there are so many things Raven could do to make these better. More generally, there are so many things Raven could do to improve Warzone's competitive scene for both players and spectators alike. Again, there's probably enough here for its own video. I could have also touched on the playlist rotations. Could they add new modes without always taking away people's favourites? And why am I yet to see Doc play solos with proximity chat? How has this never been a limited time mode? And what about all the comments? A few of these weren't too helpful. If I could just turn off a setting, I probably wouldn't still be dying like this. But a lot of you made really great points, a few of which I had never thought twice about. Many comments made it into this video, and there were some that brought up points I wasn't aware of. There were also many smaller points that I wrote down but didn't include. Things like, why do I have to wait for the dead silence timer to run out before I can pick up another field upgrade? Why does the countdown timer sometimes not start until the lobby is already full? Why can't you move over downed players? Why is there a huge delay between switching seats and when you're able to exit a heli? Why do I have to redo all my settings after every big update? The best example of a collection of less thought about problems is a pastebin I was sent by Twitter user Diego Fountains. It covers everything from standard complaints like weapon melee, to ideas for weapon balancing, to smaller things like the uselessness of the play again feature. There's a lot of great ideas here. I've linked it below if anyone wants to read. And finally, the bigger problems. The ones we'll all be closely watching when the new map arrives, the really controversial ones, and the ones we're hoping won't be a problem. I didn't really talk about any of these, at least, certainly not to the depth they're warranted. Perhaps a future video is in order. Despite all these, Warzone is still my favourite game, and I'm sure that sentiment holds true for a lot of you guys that made it this far into the video. But ignoring everything else, just imagine how good Warzone would be if they just looked a little closer at the little things.